Swendseid, and I'm with Thrive, Southern Lorraine County. We are here in Wellington High School doing another Mind, Body, and Spirit video. We are very grateful to Dave Conklin and his students in the digital media class for doing these videos, editing them, and sharing them with the public. We really thank you. We're here today. We are very fortunate to have Liz Wolanski, who is with Educational Service Center. She is Wellness Coordinator of North Ridgeville and Wellington Schools. Thank you, Liz, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Today we're going to be talking about a bill that's called Save Students Act, or HR 123, that deals with suicide and violence prevention in Ohio schools. So Liz, we're going to start off right off the bat and to ask you, what is this act?
Okay, so Ohio's 103rd Assembly back in March of 2021 enacted House Bill 123, also known as the Save Students Act, or Safety and Violence Education for Students Act. And the purpose of it was regarding school security, youth suicide, education, and training. The state legislation called for a comprehensive approach to school safety. And so there's multiple agencies that are a part of this bigger project. So it's the Ohio Department of Education, Ohio Department of Public Safety, Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and the Ohio Attorney General's Office. So with the Safe Students Act, there's an emotional and physical safety. There's emotional and physical safety requirements that are intended to create safe and supportive learning environments for all students. And the information that I'm going to be sharing today is just more of a snapshot. All of this information, it can be found on the Ohio Department of Education's website, and we're also going to make sure our communications director here for the Wellington Schools is going to make sure that there's a link provided on the school's website so that anybody can access it, because it's a pretty hefty bill, and there's a lot of pieces, parts. There's just a few parts of the bill, like the suicide prevention, the violence prevention, and social inclusion training, as well as schools have to have what are referred to as threat assessment teams in place that are required. And then there's other things that schools can put into place with the support of wellness coordinators from our Educational Service Center of Lorraine County to just kind of beef things up and make schools an even safer place for students to be. So with this, the required components of this is that annually students in grades 6 through 12 will be required to have one class period each of suicide prevention, violence prevention, social inclusion training, and schools are also being encouraged to implement what's referred to as peer-led violence prevention clubs. A lot of times we know that at that 6th through 12th grade, kids are talking to themselves more than they're talking to us adults. And so there's a lot of research out there to support peer-led programming so that the peers are the ones taking the lead. So it kind of goes back to an old concept. I come from a community mental health background, and when we would have meetings, whether it was regarding parents, families, or students, you know, the quote was, "Don't meet about me without me." And so students really, we want students to really have a voice in some of this. Because they're the population that we're serving, and they're going to be able to tell us if this is truly working.
Excellent. What prompted this Save Students Act? Was it because violence and suicide is on the rise in the whole country, or is there something specific to Ohio?
So there's a lot of different things I'm going to touch on. In regards to Ohio, the SAVE Act is part of the strategic plan for education, which is referred to as Each Child, Our Future. And it's a whole child framework for approaching education. So part of it is we know that if children aren't doing well social and emotionally, and if they're struggling with mental health needs or not feeling safe in the school environment, it's going to be really hard for them to be able to perform well academically. So first and foremost, that is one of the things that they looked at because they wanted to fit into that higher framework. However, with that in mind, there are some things and some statistics that we've noticed, not just within the past few years, not just in Ohio, but nationally, that have increased. So per the Center for Disease Control for the United States, from 1999 through 2019, we saw a pretty steady increase in the number of deaths by suicide among all age groups. And it wasn't until 2020, which I think a lot of us were surprised because that was the first year of the pandemic, that we saw a dip for the first time in that 20 years. And we were like, okay, could we finally be trending back down? Because we had put a lot of community programming in place, and a lot of schools across the state, Wellington being one of them, had suicide prevention programming that had already been implemented for some of their students, not for all their students, but they were capturing specific grades. So again, we're like, great, hopefully we'll start to see that decline down. Unfortunately, we did not. When the numbers came out for 2021, and again, this is national, and these are numbers coming from the CDC, we saw an increase again. And as of 2021, it was the most suicides on record across the United States. It was over 48,500 individuals, and youth are included in that number, died by suicide in 2021. Additionally, there was a U.S. Surgeon General report that came out in December of 2021 that was entitled Protecting Youth Mental Health. And they took a very broad look at everything impacting youth. Some of the information was prior to the pandemic. Some of the information, of course, the report came out in the middle of the pandemic. And so through that report and through lots of interviews they did across the country, they looked at youth aged 3 to 17. And as a result, we saw that this was a sharp increase from other reports that came out like within the 5 to 10 years before, that 25% of the youth in that 3 to 17 age group were struggling with depression, and we know that depression is the leading risk factor for suicide. Now, what that does not mean that depression is a very treatable diagnosis, and most people who have a diagnosis of depression do not even make suicide attempts. But we know it's a risk factor, especially when it's not treated. So 25% of our young people are walking around and struggling with depression, and then another 20%, and some of it could be mixed, 20% are walking around with more anxiety. And a lot of that we know did come out of the pandemic because of how quickly we all had to change the way that we do our everyday. The loss of social contact with people.
Say that, right.
Yeah, so it was pretty significant. The other thing that this is specific to Ohio, and this did play a role. Again, that whole child framework was a bigger role, but between August of 2017 and March of 2018, there was a suicide cluster in Stark County. Stark County is part of Northeast Ohio. It is, if you're familiar with the city of Canton, so that's where Canton is. And there were 12 youth living in Perry, Plain, Jackson, Northwest, and Canton local school districts who died by suicide in between those months of August 2017 and March 2018. There was a bigger report because the state had worked with the county on what do we need to do to address this? How can we protect our youth? How can we stop this cluster? And so they did put a pretty comprehensive program in place, and in fact, Stark County was where initially this work was happening countywide in those grades that I identified as a result of what occurred there. And even after they had submitted a report in 2019, they had 4 additional youth suicides across those different school districts.
Wow, pretty tragic.
Mm-hmm.
For parents and families, what are some of the specific requirements of this program that they can expect, or what should they be aware of?
So they should be aware of that if they have a child in the grade 6 through 12, that they are going to be offered the 3 program elements, which is the suicide prevention, the violence prevention, and the social inclusion. And it's just 1 class period of each of those 3 for all those school years. So they're gonna have programming every year moving forward. It's not gonna be the same programming. We're gonna make sure that we're giving kids different programming so that it's not like a repeat, and we want them to get helpful and meaningful information that can help them protect themselves, but also protect their youth. You know, when it comes to suicide prevention, there's not enough adults to be eyes and ears to catch all the youth that are struggling. We really want to provide kids with the tools that they need to be able to identify when their peers are struggling. And the goal is for them not to be a counselor, not to be the one that takes responsibility, but to get them to a trusted adult, so that that trusted adult can take over, can work with the family, caregivers, in order to get them that additional help that they need. In regards to the violence prevention, it's the same, it's that same concept. We know that there's a program called Sandy Hook Promise, and in fact, I'll talk a little bit about the programs that have been approved by the state for schools to use to meet these requirements. There's a program called Say Something. So basically the concept of it is if you see something that's concerning, again, report it to a trusted adult. So again, it's just adding that additional layer. We know that kids have a heavy social media presence, and they're very good at reporting stuff. In both of my districts, over the course of this school year, there is stuff that has been brought to the staff, you know, the adults in the building, their attention because students caught it on social media and immediately reported it. So those 3 requirements. The other part of it, which is really important, so those are the student requirements, and parents are, and I know we're gonna talk about this a little later, parents will get the option to not have their kids participate. The other part of this bill is that all public school districts, and this just relates to public school districts across the state, have to have what's referred to as threat assessment teams in place. And what a threat assessment team does is when a student makes a threat to another student, to a school staff person, to the school in general, or to somebody in the community, and maybe it's happened in the school, there's an assessment that trained individuals at the school then do with the student and their family and their caregivers to ensure, to kind of determine the severity of the threat, and then to come up with a plan to ensure that that youth is getting the support that they need, because usually there's an underlying reason why that happens, and we know a lot of times it does have to do with mental health, and so we want to make sure that we're getting those kids linked up as needed. And if they are removed from school temporarily, we want to have a solid and good re-entry plan in place, so that when they come back into the building, everybody who is involved with that student, as well as that student having their own coping strategies to help them get through the day-to-day. So that's another part of the bill that actually went into effect last month, in March of 2023. All districts had to have their threat assessment teams in place. So what there are building level threat assessment teams, and then there's a district level threat assessment team. So the building level teams are made up of the principals, the counselors, the district social worker, and then I'm the wellness coordinator for the district, so I am a part of that threat assessment team as well. The district level includes the superintendent, the student services director, again, the district social worker, since she covers all 3 buildings, my role since I cover all 3 buildings, and then our student resource officers. They actually are part of both the district level and the building level. And so every single one of those people have been trained in a state-approved suicide threat assessment. And the one that we chose is the gold standard for threat assessments, and it's called the Dewey Cornell CSTAG, which stands for Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines Training. And so, as I said, all those positions that I mentioned are trained in it, and probably we're doing at least 1 threat assessment a month, and most of them are mild, but we have to take every threat that comes to us seriously, and make sure that we're putting something in place to ensure that
Yeah, look at what's happened in the country in the past couple of months, it's just horrifying.
Yep.
So the threat assessment aspect of this is really critical, right?
Absolutely, yep. Now, another part that, so I talked about, so the threat assessment piece and those classroom prevention pieces are what's required for schools to put into place. There's other portions of the bill that aren't yet required, but Wellington, along with the rest of the school districts in Lorain County, have went ahead and been proactive, but that's to have key staff trained in suicide assessments, specifically what's referred to as the Columbia screener. And it's a suicide screener for all ages, but we specifically use the one for schools, which has 6 questions. And similar to that CSTAG, it's screening for the level of risk for the student. So they're either mild, moderate, or high. And the goal is that if they are presenting with suicidal thoughts, or they've made an attempt, or they're concerned about a peer, that we get an assessment done. And again, we work with a lot of different community behavioral health providers, both on the mental health side and the substance abuse side. And the goal is we want to make sure those youth are linked up to those services, so that they can have them moving forward. They can develop the skills that they need in order to deal with really difficult feelings, specifically depression and anxiety.
Okay, I think this would be a good time to take a break. Today we're going to be celebrating an institution in Wellington that everyone absolutely loves. It's called Bread and Brew. Wonderful sandwiches, wonderful soups, pastries, breads, etc. And just a warm atmosphere for families.
And
So
I really like their baked potato and bacon soup. That's my favorite.
I love their pastries.
I do love their pastries too.
Okay, here's to Bread and Brew.
Hey, you like food?
Well, take a little walk down the Bread and Brew. Here, when customers walk in, they can get Wellington's finest coffees and pastries, even with fast service. Also, there are many tasty pastries you can choose from, including a chocolate pastry, muffins, cinnamon rolls, donuts, and more. On the menu, you can find a variety of foods, going from breakfast foods to lunch sandwiches, then to soups and salads. For beverages, you can find tasty smoothies and iced teas. There's plenty of places to sit with friends and family. There's even a cozy lounge up front to sit in.
You can contact Bread and Brew at 440-647-0082. Trust me, Bread and Brew will satisfy you with everything.
Okay, we are back with Liz Wolanski of the Educational Service Center, who's talking about suicide and violence prevention in Ohio schools. And this regards the ACT program. Save Act, sorry. Can parents or guardians opt their kids out of the program if they wish? And how does that work?
So parents and guardians can opt their kids out, and the way that it will work is 2 to 3 weeks prior to the presentation or that class period, a letter will go home giving a detailed description of the programming. It'll also provide a link to ODE's website where they can read more information regarding the Safe Student Act. And it's what we refer to as like a passive permission or passive consent. And so there'll be a box on there that if parents check it, it'll be like, I do not want my child to participate. And then they'll have to they either email it back to the school or they have their child bring it back to the school and give it to the school counselor. And then that way, the days that the programming is being provided, because we do this, I've been doing this in various districts across the county for years, is the school always makes sure that there's a safe space for those students to go to in order to do work, but just someplace that they can go.
Okay. And who's going to be facilitating the program?
So every district in the county and really across the state is taking a different approach to how they're doing this. The bill is pretty general in terms of saying that it be part of health curriculum. So some districts will be having their health teachers implement the programming. The approach that we're taking here in Wellington is in regards to the suicide prevention and the violence prevention piece. We are actually working with an agency called Life Act. Life Act has been providing suicide prevention and violence prevention to the Wellington schools since the fall of 2017. We haven't hit every grade, but at some point students have gotten it. So for instance, usually we do it with our 7th, 8th, and 11th graders. And so the high school, we just met with Life Act yesterday in order to get the schedule together for the high school. So they'll be doing the two, like I said, the suicide prevention and the violence prevention. And then for the social inclusion piece, the counselors, the social worker, and some of our outside community behavioral health providers will be assisting with that. And there's also approved programming from the state. So right now, in regards to the suicide prevention, there's 3 programs that are approved. One is the Signs of Suicide program, which is what Life Act uses. Another is a program called Erica's Lighthouse, which is specifically focused on adolescent depression. And so after next year, we're going to be mixing it up so that some school years the kids are going to be getting the Signs of Suicide program, while the others are going to be getting Erica's Lighthouse. And then the third program, which unfortunately we don't yet have staff trained on here, and I'm not sure if we're going to, eventually we will, but not sure when we would actually implement it. It's called Sources of Strength. So it's another one that we can mix in there so kids aren't getting the same programming every year. I kind of already touched on, in regards to the social inclusion, a big part of what Sandy Hook Promise does is around social inclusion, and so their curriculum has been approved as well as Sources of Strength to address that piece. And that's a free curriculum, the Sandy Hook curriculum. It's a free curriculum, as is Erica's Lighthouse, and then our Mental Health Addiction and Recovery Services Board of Lorraine County pays for the digital version of the Signs of Suicide program, and then allows all of the school districts access to it, so we don't have to pay for it. So there's a variety of programming that we can use, and it's going to be changing as it starts to get implemented. More programming will be introduced.
Great. You had mentioned something to me that, outside of the tape about Ohio leading the nation and presenting the gold standard in this program. Could you explain?
So, Ohio is the first state that's actually had this specific bill. So the SAVE Act is where they've required schools, public schools, to implement this suicide prevention, violence prevention, and social inclusion training. So other states are doing programming, and the CSTAG was actually developed out of the University of Virginia by Dewey Cornell. So it's happening in other places, but as far as requiring that schools make it a part of their yearly curriculum, Ohio is the first state.
Happy to hear that. We're lucky. We're fortunate.
Yeah.
Terrific. When does the program start again?
So the program, so as I had said, that threat assessment piece has already been enacted. All of the state's public schools had to have their threat assessment teams in place by March, and all those members of the teams had to be trained in a state-approved suicide prevention, or not suicide prevention, threat assessment, which of course Wellington chose to be trained in the CSTAG. And then the classroom requirements for students, so those 6th through 12th graders, that will be implemented starting in the fall of 2023, so this upcoming school year, and then
Okay.
every year thereafter.
Okay, great. Liz, on a personal note, you are not going to be with Educational Service Center.
I'll be with Educational Service Center, and I'll be
Oh,
with
sorry, but
Wellington.
not in Wellington.
Yeah.
Okay, it's going to be our loss. Wow.
I mean,
Are you excited?
I've been working with the Wellington schools in this position for the last 3 years, and I have just really, really enjoyed the work that I've done around social emotional learning. And there's a really good group of people in place in all 3 buildings who, the goal of my position was to help the district lay the groundwork so that we had regular social emotional learning programming happening. And so we're there, we've got a ton of stuff in place. And so it's, my other district has asked me to come on full-time, which was North Ridgeville City Schools. But the groundwork is there, everything is there, and the people in place in the 3 buildings are all ready to move it forward and actually even grow it.
Terrific. Great to hear
Yeah,
that.
but I've loved working here, and I'm gonna miss all the people, and I'm really gonna miss bread and brew, so.
Well, you can always
I'm
visit
gonna definitely
Get in
visit.
your car and drive. But and could you just give us the link to the Ohio State Department of Education?
Yeah, so ODE's link is, I have to use a cheat and use my notes. So if you just put in your search engine, it's education.ohio.gov, and then you would put in /topics, /student supports, /safety and violence education, student SAVE Act. Even if you didn't, you just put in some of those words.
Yeah, save even.
Even,
right?
yeah, you
Save
just
that.
you just put in your search engine, SAVE Act, and it's automatically gonna pop up. Yep.
Great. Okay, Liz, thank you
You're
so much.
welcome, thank you.
This is really such an important program, and it's so timely.
Absolutely, absolutely.
America's children.
Yep.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
And best wishes for North
Thank you,
Ridgeville.
thank you.
Thank you, Dave and students, for putting out another video. We really, as I said, are very grateful to you. The last one is coming up in May, and we're going to focus on gardening, and we just might do a segment on the Future Farmers of America class right here at the high school. So, thanks again, Dave and students.
Thank you.